Thank you for joining us today for part one of FAFSA simplification. We did consider naming it Forget Everything You Know About FAFSA and Let's Start Over because there are some major changes, not to scare you, but to be realistic. So this presentation today represents, as I mentioned, part one of what Scholarship Services and the Washington College Access Network teams have determined is important for the rest of you to know now as you start planning your FAFSA and WASFA activities for next year. The Department of Education and FSA, or the Federal Student Aid, have not really divulged everything that will change. There's still many unknowns, but we know enough right now to share with you so that you can adapt your programming based on the knowledge we have today. Many of you or some of the regions have reached out to us looking for guidance or to brainstorm some of the activities you're thinking about. And that made us pause and think, well, even if we don't have all the answers, we think that there are enough of you starting to be very proactive in your planning. So we wanted to at least share what we know as of right now. We will repeat this session this coming Wednesday, but as I mentioned earlier, we're also recording it so you can have access to it and rewatch it as many times as you want. We are also planning a session for external partners in the next couple of weeks, so we will let you know in case anybody asks you about it. Without further ado, I would like to invite my colleagues to introduce themselves so that you know who is behind the camera today. Oh, sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cristelia Calderon Sandoval, and I'm a program officer in the Scholarships and Financial Aid Education Department with the College Success Foundation. Thank you for being here to learn about the new FAFSA changes.
Next, hi, my name is Catherine Zamau, and I serve as the Director of Program Engagement Initiatives. Thank you also, everyone, for joining us, and we hope that this can help inform you of the changes that are to come.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abigail Enright. I'm a program officer in the Scholarships and Financial Aid Education Department. Again, looking forward to these changes. I've been in financial aid for 16 years, and I'd say that this is probably a big bulk of changes, or at least a lot of changes since I started my career. So looking forward to sharing it with you.
And hello again, I'm Maria Rebecki. I'm the Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid Education here at College Success Foundation, where I've held this role for 7 years now. And I have been in this field also for over 30 years. Actually, I joined the financial aid world the year that FAFSA was launched. So I've seen it go through a lot of changes. And just like Abby mentioned, this is biggest the biggest change, if you want, that I've seen in the past few decades. So hope we can help you navigate these new waters.
Good morning. Happy Monday, everybody. My name is Trang Tran. I'm the Program Manager of Resources and Training, supporting our with our Program Engagement Initiatives team, supporting our WACAN and AmeriCorps programs. So excited to share these changes with y'all.
Okay, so what we want to focus today a little bit is talk about the objectives for today. And so at the end of this session, we hope that you are able to understand what brought about these FAFSA changes. We hope that you have enough information to start planning your FAFSA and WASFA efforts, learn about what we don't know yet, which we do know what we don't know yet. Talk a little bit about the implications for all of our work, and then identify who in the organization can provide you with guidance and support.
So the upcoming changes that we're seeing to federal financial aid really stem from three pieces of legislation that were passed in recent years. So the first one is the Futures Act. This allows for data sharing between the IRS and the Department of Education. There is currently some data sharing with the IRS data retrieval tool on the FAFSA, but this legislation just broadens the access between the two different agencies. The bulk of the changes that we are going to see are coming from the next piece of legislation, which is the FAFSA Simplification Act. This legislation not only updates the length and questions on the FAFSA, but it also updates the federal methodology, and that is what is used to determine financial aid eligibility. And then finally, the Consolidation Appropriations Act, really it allows for an increase in Pell Grants, and they had to make some technical changes to the FAFSA Simplification Act.
Let's review FSA ID changes and the multi-factor authentication process. So by the end of January 2023, every person who has an FSA ID and attempts to log into studentaid.gov for any reason will be subjected to the multi-factor authentication process. Users have the option of using their email, text message, or a verification application on their phone to verify their account. If students do not own a cell phone, they can stick to authenticating their FSA ID account by email. To obtain an authenticator application, users can go to their app store on their cell phone. We recommend students set up all three verification options if they're able to. Once the student verifies one or more of the available options, the student will see a check mark, as you can see on the screenshot on the slide. Setting up the three options will give them several ways to authenticate their FSA ID account. Save keys are going away because students will need to authenticate their FSA ID every time they log in into their FAFSA. When the 24-25 FAFSA form becomes available, students will not be able to access the FAFSA form without an FSA ID. Users can no longer set up an FSA ID inside the FAFSA as students were able to in the past. Another change is that an FSA ID will be required for those without a social security number. We were told by federal student aid that they're currently, NCAN informed us that federal student aid is currently working on creating a process. We don't know if FSA IDs for undocumented parents will be tied to their individual taxpayer identification number, also known as ITINs. Once this process is created, undocumented parents will be able to sign electronically. Students won't have to print out the signature page. Again, FSA has not shared any specific information about the process or information required. There are questions about who or what federal agencies will see the undocumented parents' information. We know that they're going to be entering their address. NCAN assured us that there is language that information provided for the FAFSA will only be used for FAFSA purposes. Information is shared with the IRS and students' information is verified with the Social Security Administration, and then Homeland Security verifies the student's immigration status. We're waiting to hear for more information because this will be a concern for the communities we serve. Another new change is the backup code. Users will have an opportunity at the end of setting up their FSA ID to obtain a backup code. This can be used in case no other option works, like the email, text, or the phone app. Students will need to write it somewhere. Remember, it can only be used once. And by the end of this month, users will be able to generate a new backup code if they already used the one they created. And so login remains similar for students. They enter their FSA ID information and they choose how to authenticate their accounts, either via text, email, or their app. If users have trouble with the three options, they can click on an option that will say, help me access my account, and then that's where they enter their backup code.
The, the other item to mention is that the FSA ID verification timeframe now is going to be 5 to 7 days. So, when we used to have FAFSA, WASFA events, and students or families would get their FSA ID right then and there, and then start their FAFSA application, that will no longer be the case. So we need to start thinking about, how this process is going to go in the future. We'll talk a little bit more later about it. So in terms of streamlining the form itself, for next year, students will need to report the financial information of the parent who provides the greater financial support. In the past, we used to look at who the student lived with, but that's no longer the case. So the parent that provides the most financial support is the one whose information is going to be entered in the FAFSA for the student. Um, you can have a situation where the student lives with a
Maria,
custodian. Yeah.
this is I was set up to do this slide. Oh, you can continue.
No, it's okay. If you have notes, please go for it.
Okay, thanks. Um, So as you may know, in the past, students were able to use the IRS direct retrieval tool. For the 23-24 FAFSA, this will be replaced by the direct transfer of IRS information. Users will need to click on a permission box that will show up at the beginning of the form to allow their information to be transferred from the IRS into the FAFSA form. This will apply to non-tax filers and those without a social security number. We don't know if ITINs will be used. If they are used, it could mean that the income information that is transferred from the IRS will be associated with that ITIN, but at this time, we don't know the specifics of how this will work. If no permission was given to bring over information from the IRS, the FAFSA form will be considered incomplete. The college will need to contact the person that submitted the incomplete FAFSA and ask them to check the box so information is transferred from the IRS and then it can be processed at the college level. And then as Maria was mentioning, for next year, students need to report the financial information of the parents who provides the greater financial support. So who the student lives with or who claims them on taxes does not matter. It's only who provides greater financial support. So you can have a situation where the student lives with the custodial parent, but the non-custodial parent provides greater financial support. And let's assume that non-custodial parent remarried. The student would need to provide the non-custodial parents and step parents financial information. If the student's parents filing jointly, then only one parent needs to provide the information. One parent can approve the transfer of the joint tax return information. And if you have two parents living together, but they're not married, then each will need to create an FSA ID and give approval to transfer their tax information. This also applies to parents who are married, but who file their taxes separately. So we were told by NCAN that with this scenario, it's like having 3 mini applications merging into one. You will not see the message transferred from IRS, only the financial aid. The financial aid office will be able to see the IRS information that was transferred. Those experiencing identity theft might be able to enter their information manually, but at this time, we don't know who will be able to enter information manually. This will be limited to a few specific situations. And then the FAFSA paper forms will only be available for students who are incarcerated. Yeah.
So there are still a lot of things that we don't know, but we did want to highlight some of the more important ones to help you get started on whatever you need to do in your areas. So the first one is that we don't know exactly the date that the FAFSA is opening. It sounds like that, FSA may not meet the October 1st deadline for how they currently, or for the date that they currently open FAFSAs. And they have until January 1st, 2024 to actually release the 24-25 FAFSA. Due to all of the changes, it might be likely that we don't see a FAFSA until closer to January 1st. And so that kind of brings up a lot of questions. Will colleges, universities, and states now change their financial aid deadline to align with when the FAFSA becomes available? This will affect processing for a lot of colleges and universities that you work with, and of course the programming that you create for FAFSA and WASFA completion. It also sounds like we will not be getting any sort of copy of the 24-25 FAFSA until right before its release date. So that might, again, also affect some of that programming where we're kind of going into this in a little bit into the unknown of what that FAFSA will look like. Like we mentioned earlier, we don't know how folks without a social security number will get an FSA ID or be able to use the IRS FTI. Again, we know that FSA is working on that, but we don't know what that process looks like. And then also, again, we don't know what scenarios will be allowed to use that manual entry of income on the FAFSA. Right now, everybody is going to have their IRS information imported directly into the FAFSA. So we can assume maybe certain situations, like folks without a social security number, may be able to enter their information manually, but again, we don't know. We also don't know if financial aid offices will be ready to implement these changes. Institutions tend to be reactive with regulations and guidelines. So colleges might be waiting until the Department of Ed issues their final guidance before making any changes, which in turn will will cause delays in processing. We also don't know how financial aid offices will account for the new eligibility criteria. So there will no longer be EFC, or expected family contribution. That is now changing to the SAI, or Student Aid Index. The SAI has a different calculation and methodology than the EFC, although certain things are similar. There are a lot of changes in terms of the actual calculation. So what happens is that a lot of students who may have been eligible for aid may lose their eligibility. And we'll really see this with a lot of current college students who are already awarded financial aid, and now it's been taken away. So this could result in maybe petitions or professional judgment appeals. And then finally, we don't know if and how WASAC will adjust. We do know that they plan to mirror the WASFA after this new FAFSA. But we also want to know, with the new federal methodology, how is that going to affect eligibility for state financial aid programs?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the implication for our work. So first of all is the communications that we'll be doing with students and parents, right? I'm not really fully versed on the role or the full scope of the parent engagement specialist at this time, but it sounds to me like maybe they would have a bigger role to play. As Abby was just saying, especially for those of you working in college services, we will have to have, unfortunately, some really difficult conversations with students and families. They're very used to a process and used to qualifying for certain federal financial aid that may now not qualify for it. So, the other difficult conversation, as Criselia mentioned earlier, is that, it sounds like individuals without social security numbers now will be required to secure an FSA ID. And so having those really difficult conversations about safety and privacy and, having to put information in a federal form. So it sounds like those conversations will have to continue to happen. As I mentioned earlier, we may want to consider having separate FSAID events from the FAFSA completion nights themselves, because it will take a little bit of time for those FSA IDs to actually work. And unlike in the past where you could start a FAFSA application without having an FSA ID verified, you won't be able to start the application at all without an FSA ID verified for the student and the parent, or parents, or parent and step parent. So things for us to consider. Um, We'll have to create new guides with instructions, new presentations, new webinars, as I mentioned, guides and, all these handouts that we have created in the past. Of course, you can count on the WACAN and the Scholarship Services Department to do that for you. But if you develop your own, you'll have to start thinking about that. As we've been mentioning, we'll have to have special consideration for current students. CSF needs to start engaging in conversations of what are we going to do if we're able to do anything to, maybe fundraise for those students that will lose, for example, Pell Grant eligibility, or or their Pell Grant reduces, and we still want them, of course, to graduate and have enough funding, good funding to graduate. So these are all conversations that are ongoing, and we have to see what comes out of that. And so we'll have to think about how we have these conversations with students and parents, again, whose old EFC or new student aid index increases, right? So we need to think about how we're going to help manage expectations. We need to think about how we're going to craft communications with all the different groups of students and parents, or supporting adults. And also we need to start thinking in how we're going to start having these conversations and how we're going to develop or adjust our collaborations with the different high schools, districts, and colleges and universities to see how we can partner and make this process a little bit less difficult for everybody.
All right. If you've been holding your breath this entire time, I need y'all to take a deep breath. I know that these changes, may seem like a lot, but please stay rest assured that the scholarships and financial aid education team and the PEI team will continue to stay on top of these changes as it applies to the FAFSA and WASFA applications, and keep you all informed and well equipped. And so our teams will continue to be available for technical assistance throughout the FAFSA WASPA completion efforts, right? If you need a thought partner in thinking about how will this affect your particular team, please be sure to reach out. The teams will continue to provide training, answer questions, and are committed again to staying up to date with the knowledge to help you do your work. In terms of the walk-in team, our college-bound regional officers currently provide support to practitioners throughout the state of Washington on college-bound awareness efforts and FAFSA WASPA completion efforts, and financial aid. And so this will not change. And so due to these upcoming changes, the walk-in team will be putting their heads together to determine a statewide strategy on how to stay up to date, trained, and continue to support practitioners statewide through the following strategies of resources and materials, technical assistance, supporting campaigns, and trainings. So there are folks in the organization here, trying to stay on top of all these changes. Now, in terms of next steps, there are quite a lot of unknowns still with these changes. And I know it may feel overwhelming, but there are things that you can do now with what we do know, especially to reduce your anxiety over the uncertainty, right? So first, start encouraging students and parents to start getting their FSA IDs, especially with, the extended timeline where it takes to verify FSA IDs. So if we want students to have those, students and parents to have those early in advance before FAFSA WASPA completion nights. For parents without social security numbers, start collecting the parent's full name, date of birth, and email address to prepare to create their FSA IDs once FSA gives us a little bit more guidance on what that process will look like. Work with your high schools, school districts, colleges, and universities. Talk with your partners and thinking about how are people preparing for these changes? Are people aware? If not, how can they start preparing? How can we be better partners in that work? if you're knowing that you're going to be hosting some FAFSA WASFA completion events whenever the FAFSA and WASFA application opens, with these major trainings, training volunteer with these major changes, training volunteers effectively is so much more important. So it's really important for you to start thinking about how you will incorporate volunteer training so that they can provide accurate information to students and families, because we don't want to give students and families the incorrect information that may impact their financial aid. Because there will be eligibility and package changes as a result of these changes to the FAFSA, how much student aid a student will receive may be uncertain. And so to prepare for this uncertainty with the change to the SAI, please recommend your students to do the following to prepare for such changes, like begin, maybe a more aggressive scholarship search, start saving from their jobs, maybe working a summertime job, and compile documents for appeals in case they'll need to submit an appeal to their financial aid office once they receive their aid package for the following year. We will be putting together a part 2 as soon as we get the details, kind of going into more logistics, and present this information that we shared with y'all to external partners as well. And we'll share the details with you once that they are available.
Okay. So, oh, okay. Go ahead, Abby.
Okay, so just to follow up with what Trang mentioned, we are here at Scholarship Services really going to maintain or keep up to date with the changes that are occurring. So please don't forget about our financial aid hub. We do have a student and practitioner side. So we will be updating the information, slides, presentations, and all of that. Those presentations and copies of slides will be on there. Again, a lot of things are still unknown, so we probably can't get to every single presentation that we have there now, but as soon as things are available, we will be putting them on the website.
And we will be uploading the recording for today's presentation on the federal update section of the Financial Aid Hub. I see, Paul, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. So at first I was like, yay, they're gonna streamline the FAFSA. And then now I'm like, boo, this is all bad. Are there any positives to this? Or is this mostly just bad for our kids?
If I could go, I would say there are positives in this. Students and parents no longer have to worry about inputting the wrong income information, we hope. So the idea is that income information can be just straight from the IRS. And the number of questions are supposedly going from like 113 questions to about 36. So hopefully that also helps in terms of getting FAFSAs completed. There, on the eligibility side, due to the change in federal methodology, although some students might lose eligibility, there are going to be more students who gain eligibility who otherwise wouldn't have in the current calculation of the EFC. So it's kind of a give and take, right? So even though some of these changes are complicated, there are going to be, in my opinion, more middle income folks getting eligibility for the Pell Grant.
I'm a little bit less optimistic, Paul, as you have come to know. I think that middle income families, as Abby mentioned, will be the ones that are getting the most squeezed, if you want. And contrary to, I brought up this question at a NASFA webinar, which didn't get answered, not surprisingly. That most of these changes look to me as counter to what the college access and success field has been advocating for the last couple decades, right? So some higher income families will actually gain access to Pell Grant. It may be the minimum Pell Grant, but it will be something that they didn't have access before. So to me, that is a huge red flag. I still continue to question who writes these legislation, how in touch or not really are they with the communities that this support is supposed to go to. So, okay, I see another hand. Brittany.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
I wonder with all the changes, and Maria, you can tell me if they said absolutely not. With all the changes, has there been any verbiage on the reasoning for this? Because a lot of our parents and students, like, they're gonna want to know why they are not always inclined to put their information. And so I just wonder if they gave us any verbiage to support the changes because they want to see the benefits for them. And also, I wonder, has there been any conversation about, the verification process, but also professional judgments, given they're going to change this whole process. So every school has they can have their own PJ process. How are we going to be able to, handle that for our students?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say, Brittany, is that this slide over here, if you click on any of the legislation, we actually linked it to a whole host of resources where you can get the actual legislation and the language and the rationale they used to come up with these changes. That's number one. Number two, I think that is going to be part of the work that the WACAN PI and scholarship services teams are going to engage to provide you with a little bit of, um, sort of a script for you to use with students and families and maybe even schools that you work with. Um, I think the idea has always been, FAFSA simplification, and these are the ways that they have come up with to simplify the process, but overlooking so much, so much. I know that Abby has a lot more to say about these, so I'm going to let her jump in. I will tell you something else that came up in both the NCAN and the NASFA conferences or webinars that we attended in the last 2 weeks, is that yes, that schools are prepared for a landslide or tsunami of appeals because they know that many families will be affected. And I can't remember, Abby, remind me if any one of these pieces of legislation or in the past year something has been passed in regards to appeals and professional judgments. Like in the past, okay, let me say this and then I'll pass it back to you, Abby. In the past, some schools were so fearful of an audit finding them doing something wrong or inconsistent or unfair when approving professional judgment and appeals that many institutions just denied 100% of the appeals. And then I know that the FSA, the Department of Ed, came out in the last few years during the pandemic saying that's absolutely not aligned with the regulations we have set up. You are required to review every single one of them. Of course, you're not required to approve every single one, but you have a due diligence to have a system in place, procedures and forms for students to submit. So that's as far as I know. I'll pass it on to my colleague to expand.
So when the higher education emergency relief funds, I believe it was the third iteration of it that passed in like 2021 or something, or at the end of 2020. Anyways, in order for any school to get any higher education relief funds or HERF-3 money, they were required to market to all students that of the professional judgment option. So all schools who received federal money due to the pandemic should be promoting at this point in time professional judgments. Now, the thing is that was there. It was a kind of bait, right, for schools to provide that. We don't know if now with the changes to the FAFSA and the federal methodology, how much the Department of Ed is going, and now that the HERF funds have been dispersed, how much the feds are actually going to be pushing institutions to do professional judgments. But yes, right now there is still a big push for professional judgments. But I just don't know how long that lasts. Sometimes with the Department of Ed, they kind of get a certain thing that they want to make sure they're telling schools, and then it kind of goes on the back burner after a year or two. So that could be the case, but hopefully that's not, and that the Department of Ed will be very supportive of institutions doing professional judgments due to the change in calculation.
What other questions? Comments? Outrage? Happiness?
Sorry, one more question, and you guys
Yeah.
may have already gone through this. So
Fine.
without a social security, they're just putting in their name, their date of birth. Oh, go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, at this time, all we know is that they're working on a process on how individuals without a social security number will get their FSA ID, but there is no guidance yet. They have told us that they will want everybody to have an FSA ID, but this particular group of students or parents do not have a process to do that yet.
So they're going to be moving away completely from, like, when you go to the FAFSA and it says other ways, other options to sign, that will no longer be a thing. You cannot. Okay.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And something we really talked about not getting too much into the weeds today, not to start giving you pieces without having more information. But for example, since we're talking about these, it may not be the best idea to have the students start the process because of how the skip logic is going to work. So, it may be a better idea for the parent to start the process and then the student to do their part. I'm just going to say that and cut it there.
I also want to add to something that is going to be interesting when you're talking to students and parents about FSA IDs. Students have to know their parents' legal name as stated on their Social Security card. Everything is going to be ran through Social Security Administration, USCIS, all of the different agencies. And so everything has to match. And I've experienced it where students don't know their parents' real names. Or legal names, I should say. So as you're talking to students, as folks are creating user IDs now, because they can, let's make sure that students and parents are using the right names, because that's how the applications are going to link, right? So parents going to do their part, students going to do their part, and somewhere they're going to link with the date of birth, social security number, and the legal name. So making sure that students are very aware of all of these factors. Maybe not the social security. I don't know if they're actually going to have students put in their parents' social security number or vice versa, but definitely name, date of birth, and email. I forgot to say email, because email is another way that they're going to link. So in the past, we've probably had students like, oh, well, I don't know. It begins with on the FAFSA right now, you just put the first initial and the last name and date of birth. Now we're going to be more specific and intentional. Is this your parent? So making sure that everybody who's filling out the FAFSA knows each other's information so it can be combined.
Carrie.
So, how do all of these changes, at least with what we know at this point, how do all of these changes intersect with the WASFA? Because I know that the WASFA is modeled very closely to the FAFSA application. Do you know at this point how the Washington legislature is handling these changes, how they're going to impact the WASFA application as well? Is there any word on that? And are there going to be any meetings that we can attend where that's going to be addressed?
Thank you, Carrie, for that question. So I actually reached out to WASAC last week to ask them that very question. And so what they said is that they are going to mirror the FAFSA application. So at least you should have consistency when you're talking with families completing both applications. What they haven't talked about is if the their login, the way to log in, right? The way that people create their WASFA accounts is going to change in any way. And they haven't yet talked about if how the state may respond to this, right? Like we were talking earlier, like some students that may lose eligibility for Pell Grant. So does that mean that, they may increase their eligibility for the Washington College Grant, for example? This is a conversation that in the NASFA webinar that we attended last week, they were saying, it will be super important to see how state agencies respond and attach to these federal changes to compensate in some way, but we don't know yet. So I know that WASAC will put together webinars and presentations as soon as we have more information. We're all kind of waiting for FSA to just tell us exactly how it's going to be so that in the case of WASAC, they can adjust WASFA and other state, funding. There are no guarantees that they will adjust the state funding, but it's certainly a conversation that will need to happen.
All right. Thanks, Maria.
Of course.
I'm nervous, but thanks for sharing. Guess we'll just hope for the best. And yeah, I
Yeah.
try to put on like the optimistic and brave face for our students because I know our dilemma already is getting some students and parents to see the value and not have a financial stressor. And some of our students and parents have been in the program. I know that they have brothers and siblings. And so, like you said, they're used to a certain process. And then to see that process change and their income level hasn't necessarily changed. Yeah,
But their
it's
student aid index now changed.
changes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be an uphill battle. I would be living in bliss if I said it's just gonna be a perfect walk off into the sunset. So
Yeah. No.
I'm nervous, but yeah, this is what we do.
Yeah, I think, Brittany, many of us are nervous. I'm also particularly concerned with students that have step parents, that we know that in many, many cases, they are so reluctant to provide information. And I think about now asking them to create an FSA ID. Um, yeah, it makes me very nervous, very, very nervous. But we'll have to roll with the punches and adapt and adjust and do the best we can to help students pay for college. So we're all in this together. So we'll figure out ways like we have in the past. Well, if there are no other questions, I thank you so much for attending today and for your thoughtful questions. Again, we're repeating this session on Wednesday. We'll upload the recording to the Financial Aid Hub, and you can always email us with your questions. As soon as we have details, we'll put together part 2. And as soon as we schedule part 1 for external partners, we'll let you know so that you can help us spread the words. Let me see. Yeah, you're right, Catherine. There's some things we know and a bunch of things that we're still waiting to learn. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Um, we'll keep you posted.
Do you think it would be helpful for the next one if we had like a chart for parents, like which parent is supposed to put in their information?
Um, sorry. Yes, we can. Although, yeah, we can. We can.
Maybe a
I was trying to
starting
think
one.
what other changes, but no, I think that that's pretty set in stone. So I think we're trying to stay more at the 20,000 mile view of things. We kind of started, going into details, but we wanted to leave it for part 2, but we definitely can.
It's okay. A little dabbling it was very helpful actually to hear too, because it puts things into context. So
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
great job,
Um,
everyone. Thank you.
no, of course.
Okay, I'm gonna head out to another meeting.
Okay. Thank you,
Have a great
everyone.
week. Take
I'll see
care.
you later.
Bye.
Bye.